Anna Kasparian, host of The Young Turks, which claims to be a progressive network, has recently been taking quite the rhetorical shift on trans issues in a very concerning light, to the point where there is a Fox News article written about Anna Kasparian, how she breaks with the left and warns that puberty blockers can cause irreparable harm to children, which is pretty yikes and just not true. So let's dive into this a little bit. Fox News article talks about her appearance on the Adam and Stitch show, talking about transgender politics and cancel culture, where she took quite the radical centrist type of positions. She declared it's a lie that puberty blockers are reversible. In some cases they are not, and they cause irreparable harm. What's extremely concerning about the way that she approached this topic is how she's not specific about any of these concerns or what the harm is or what's not reversible. She's just parroting these claims in a very vague light that just paints puberty blockers as scary and dangerous and unknown, when that's literally not true. Like, the side effects of puberty blockers that we know about are lowered bone density and a delay in mental development, but these all go away when you stop taking the puberty blockers. What we can show, I'm gonna do a little paint chart to demonstrate this. Oh yeah, let's get into the graph. We're gonna have age on the x-axis, and the y-axis is gonna be bone for bone density. And so for kids that are before puberty, essentially you increase at kind of like this steady prepubertal rate. When you hit puberty, you're going to have this sharper increase, and then as you reach adulthood, it pretty tapers off and stays steady. Now, for kids that are on puberty blockers, they have this same prepubertal growth rate. Then when they're on puberty blockers for a couple of years, they'll continue at that prepubertal rate, and then after they stop taking the puberty blockers, that's when they start to see their rapid increase. And they typically end up just about the same or slightly lower than the bone density of people who were not on puberty blockers. Not a concerning difference at all. If this is like the average level for adults, this is the average level for those that are on puberty blockers, concerning levels would be like quite a bit further down. Essentially, the same thing is true with the studies that showed IQ with puberty blockers, where there's an increase in IQ associated with puberty, but the kids that had puberty blockers essentially was delayed by a year or two. This is just how it goes with puberty blockers. And with the IQ studies, they actually reached the exact same level as the population that didn't take puberty blockers. The concerns about puberty blockers, the side effects, these are all discussed in the informational packet that parents get, that trans people get, that everybody's informed about when they take puberty blockers. And these side effects go away when you stop taking the puberty blockers, which is exactly why, like, they're called reversible, because the side effects go away when you stop them. The side effects are reversed. That's what it means to be reversible. Yeah, people often misquote the IQ studies. The problem that people do with like the IQ studies is what they'll do is they'll take a look at people who are not on puberty blockers at this point and people who are on puberty blockers at this point and say, aha, well, look at that. The ones on puberty blockers had lower IQ. But the studies that go further, that track them up into adulthood, find that they reach the same point in adulthood. It's not an actual issue. It's just looking at the data at a time where there's a difference between the two. That is our science chart for the stream. And it says, withholding information because you don't like the information getting out there ain't the way to go, because it destroys any opportunity for us to actually have a good faith debate about what we should do moving forward. What are the pros and cons? Then mention the pros and cons. Like, the problem is that she's not even mentioning the pros and cons. She's not mentioning the side effects. She's not mentioning that they go away when you stop taking the medicine. The problem is that she's fear-mongering without saying anything in this kind of radical centrist rhetorical strategy that looks like she might be gearing up for a why I left the left kind of response, which is really scary because Anna had been pretty based on trans topics and on progressive topics for quite a while. I know on stream a while back we reviewed her debating Dennis Prager relatively recently, and she slaughtered him. She does great work, or at least she used to. And so it's just really sad to see this kind of rhetoric coming from somebody who I know can be better. Kasparian has spoken out about gender ideology recently. In March, she scorched inclusive language and warned, please don't ever refer to me as a person with a uterus, birthing person, or person who menstruates. How do people not realizing how degrading this is? The really funny thing is that her recent, I guess, triggered moment about the language to refer to people that have certain biological functions or body parts, she literally argued against this perspective just months ago. Here was a clip from her on The Young Turks arguing for inclusive language just a couple months back.
It's bad faith. They know there's a difference between gender and sex. They know that it is very possible for someone to be born a biological male or a biological female, but in terms of gender, identify differently as a male or non-binary, but they still have the biological capacity, the physical capacity to get pregnant. So that's why the language, the rhetoric is inclusive to include those people.
Right there. Because they still have the biological capacity to get pregnant. That's why the language of pregnant person or birthing person includes them. She literally made the argument demonstrating why it's silly and bad faith to be triggered about this. And yet she's getting triggered about it now.
It is not a big deal, but they make it a big deal. They manufacture it into a big deal because that's all Republicans are. That's all they have. This is all they do. Endless bad faith arguments meant to fearmonger and direct hatred and fear toward other Americans, typically powerless Americans.
Based right there. Pointing out that it's bad faith, it's fear-mongering, it's based in the most pointless non-issue. And it's so crazy that somebody that could point this out so aptly is now getting triggered by like the birthing person language. Doing this coverage further, there's a lot that happened, and the Humanist Report released a great video covering this, so let's go ahead and use this as a bit of a springboard to talk about more surrounding Anna, including other like trans employees of TYT leading the network because they tried to like talk with Anna and Cenk, the other host, about trans topics. But they were just not receptive of listening. Yeah, this is Benny. She used to work for TYT. She's a trans woman, and she left the network over them not listening to her and not refusing to like have her on, talk these issues through privately or on the show.
I just can't be a part of TYT anymore. It's just too much. It's ridiculous. Because at a certain point, it becomes embarrassing for me. Because how can I, as a trans person who actually knows the science behind this, who actually is like actively trying to support trans people, as somebody that people look up to me, right? People literally like send me messages and be like, I'm so inspired, you know, you being a TYT, and I have to deal with messages from them now asking about, hey, what's going on with TIT? Hey, what the hell is happening here? Like, why is Anna saying this? Why is Cenk saying this? And that is just like the amount of like psychic damage that I have to take every single day dealing with not only the transphobic nonsense of the Republicans, but also whatever Cenk and Anna are on right now. It's just too much. And I just, because at a certain point it becomes embarrassing because then people think that I'm like endorsing their views. And I cannot. I will not. I refuse to lend any support to those views whatsoever.
You wanna know what gets even more embarrassing about it? When Anna was announcing Benny leaving the network, Anna accidentally misgendered Benny on the way out.
Unfortunately,
like imagine going through all this shit, ending up leaving because you have morals, because you have principles, and getting misgendered on the way out because of their bad handling of trans issues.
Benny has decided to leave TYT. I am definitely heartbroken over her decision to do that.
Ouch. Like that hurts really bad. Over accusations of not handling trans issues well, to hit the accidental misgendering. I mean, like the correct thing to do in that situation is to correct yourself and move on, if we interpret this as an accident. But ouch, that really hurts. That really hurts.
You just watched a small portion of Benny Carollo's 30-minute-long video explaining in great detail why she is leaving TYT. Now, for those of you who don't know, Benny was a TYT contributor, but as a trans person, she can simply no longer condone the anti-trans rhetoric coming from the show's main hosts. Now, if you're unaware, Benny is not the only trans TYT contributor to call it quits. Sandy Lovas, a non-binary person who also hosts Left of the Box, also left the network recently and recently spoke out as well for the same reason.
Yeah, this is not a one-off issue. This has been happening time and time again. All these people have been trying to work with the network from within and just being like denied, not allowed to speak with the people. And it just shows like real bad faith from TYT, which is just so disappointing.
A year ago, when I had only been working on Rebel HQ for a month, I called out Cenk and Anna on this very issue. Do you think I wasn't aware of the risk attached to that? Damn straight I'd be making noise about this both on and off camera. So what if I lose my job over it? Hell, I'm making these videos knowing full well I'm probably blowing any chance I have of ever getting back on that network.
This is what it looks like to have principles. Based for standing up for what you believe in spite of your network trying to silence you, not trying to listen to you and hear you out. I respect them for having principles. I respect them immensely.
Went on to encourage the TYT staff to walk out in support of their trans comrades. But Benny and Sandy aren't the only LGBTQ plus people at the network that have left. After being a network partner since 2017, I officially left TYT on May 1st of this year.
3 strikes and you're out. 3 LGBTQ members of TYT have now left over their poor handling of trans issues in recent months. It's getting bad.
And I think you all know why. I never stated why, but you all know why. It was because of this turn that they've made recently. And as you all know, leaving TYT was an absolute nightmare for me. I lost monetization for over a month, but I just couldn't be part of a network that doesn't value my community. And all 3 of us have tried to inform them on being better allies, but none of those attempts have been successful. All of us have failed.
Based and spine-pilled, but also just really sad to see that, like, the network is not even willing to listen to the experiences and perspectives from the communities that these issues affect directly. Like, Anna and Cenk are both straight and cis. These issues do not affect them directly in the same way that it affects these people directly. And they're not even willing to hear out their perspective. That's really yikesy.
That's 3 LGBTQ plus people that TYT lost within the span of a couple of months. So the question is, how many LGBTQ plus people are even left at TYT? How comfortable are those remaining LGBTQ plus employees in the face of all of this? I mean, they've got to feel really uncomfortable now. You know, Cenk and Anna love to scold idiot trans activists over optics, but have they considered the optics of this crisis that they've created? How the supposed home of progressives...
True. Yeah, a lot of the concerns that Anna and Cenk were raising were, oh, trans people doing bad optics, like talking about trans sports as bad optics, or talking about children transitioning as bad optics. But, like, being criticized from within and having trans people leaving your network is horrible optics. The idea of, like, it seems that the left is tearing itself apart from the inside out because you won't even hear out people who have a different perspective from you. That looks... And also the idea of, like, trying to change your reporting on an educational platform based off of optics is really silly because you can inform people about the issues if the optics are not, like, in your... Like, if there's an issue that's unpopular but is based in science, like, say, trans sports, it is your job to inform people and to teach them the correct take, not to just give in to bad optics. I mean, we can go with a hyperbolic example of, like, if we go back to Nazi Germany, and, like, it was very popular for, like, anti-Semitism, I would hope that an honest news network would be like, yeah, anti-Semitism is still bad and we should fight it. Especially now. Especially because because there is rising hate against Jewish people or modern day trans people. Like, you should try to correct the bad take and try to change people's minds. That's your job, is changing minds.
Lost multiple LGBTQ plus affiliates in just a couple of months because of their rhetoric, because of their refusal to listen to anything that we have to say, because they just disregard our input, even if it comes from a good place, even if they've known at least me, for example, for years. I mean, if that doesn't trigger introspection, literally nothing will. Now, to those not plugged into the discourse, let me give you some additional context. So, elements of TYT's coverage has become increasingly reactionary, not just this year, not just with regard to the trans issue, but more broadly speaking. And that's not to characterize the totality of their content, but they have gotten noticeably more reactionary, ranging from their coverage of crime to homelessness to Cenk's endorsement of a right-wing billionaire who tried to buy the Los Angeles mayoral race after leading the charge against money in politics for years. It all is very out of character seemingly for them. But the straw that broke the camel's back was this irrational tweet by Anna Kasparian where she demanded to not be called a birthing person. People like myself responded asking who called her that,
and this is the huge rhetorical shift from that clip that we showed, where Anna was, like, showing that it's just bad faith and weaponizing a blatant misrepresentation of the difference between sex and gender to be triggered about biological language. So like this massive rhetorical shift is so out of character for her.
Explained that this type of inclusive language is only used in very specific legal or clinical settings. She then doubled down weeks later, specifically in an attack against my leftist mafia co-host, and she laughed off the quote meltdowns over that tweet. But leftists and colleagues tried to delicately explain to both Anna and Cenk, who defended her at the time, that fixating and hyper-focusing on these insignificant issues, it just lends credence to the right's claim that trans people and their allies are unreasonable.
Yeah, that's the other thing about their weird, like, optical, like their weird, like, this is bad optics rhetoric. If you think that, like, talking about, you know, inclusive language discourse is bad optics, or if you think that talking about trans sports is bad optics, then, like, wouldn't you just want to, like, emphasize that this is such a non-issue and, like, focus on issues that really matter? Like, you can just choose to instead focus on more prominent issues, things like the right's rising genocidal rhetoric against trans people, access to healthcare that is life-saving. Like, you can focus on the bigger issues if you think that these are just, like, losing battles. Like, why would you hyper-focus on the issues that you think are losing battles if you think they're losing battles? Their entire approach makes no sense, both because they're failing to educate on issues that that's their job to educate on, and they're hyper-focusing on what they think is not a good idea to focus on.
We even explained how, as cis allies ourselves, we've made mistakes that we've had to correct. I explained how purposefully misgendering transphobes is not a good look. That's not how trans people want me to advocate for them. Lance from the Surfs, my leftist mafia co-host, has explained how trans people have talked to him about particular jokes that he shouldn't be making as a cis person. So we tried to go above and beyond to explain how we've been in this predicament as well, whereas allies, we didn't do the best, but we had to course correct. So that way they realize that it's not an attack on them, it's just we're trying to do better in our advocacy after going out of our way to be charitable.
Which is also weird, because if their concerns are about optics, focusing on course correcting is how you would handle an optical consideration. Is, okay, well, what's the best course we can take to handle this? Based off of the framework they're using, these allies and trans people who worked at TYT approached it in the right way within their own framework, and they still got turned down and still were ignored.
Kasparian accused the leftist mafia of gaslighting her on this issue, which is odd considering the fact that she made this exact point that we all made about inclusive language 8 months prior in a video where Josh Hawley was criticizing Professor Kiara Bridges for using the term people with the capacity for pregnancy. So was she gaslighting herself, or
yeah, that was the clip
what?
That we showed earlier.
Like, it doesn't make sense, right? To say that we were gaslighting is bizarre, and just to be extra sure that I didn't say anything that I regret, I went back and watched our first episode where we talked about this, and we were all incredibly kind, but yet, despite the use of our kid gloves, they've only gotten worse. They didn't listen to anything we had to say, and they've gotten much worse. And there's a lot of clips floating around on the internet that people are reacting to, and we're not going to watch all of them. There's a lot, but I want to point out a couple of examples here to demonstrate what I mean and why I feel like at this point, they may be just too far gone, and I'm done trying to educate them if clearly they're not even coming from a position of good faith any longer, right? So one example is Anna and Cenk talking about a MAGA chud's motivation for something that he said, and listen specifically to one of the things that Anna says.
What are your values that Donald Trump shares with you then?
Parents in control of their children, you know, being able to make choices for your family. America's being assaulted. Open borders, you know all the issues. We all know the issues.
He has our values, does he? What's your values? I mean, you don't mean family values. He's raw dogging porn stars, and he says terrible things, does terrible things. You don't mean family values. So what values are you talking about? Oh, you know, he believes in putting parents in charge of children. That means I don't like gay people. I'm sorry, that's what it means.
No, that means he wants to be able to make a decision or help.
A decision about what?
He doesn't want schools making decisions for
about
his
what?
Kids.
About gay people.
It's
and racism, right? He doesn't want racism taught. Those are the two issues, Anna. Those are the two issues in the schools.
Those are not the two issues.
She's seeming very sympathetic to this parent's position. I think Cenk is absolutely right in that when he talks about parental rights, he means he doesn't want his kid to learn about gay people, and he doesn't want his kid to learn about trans people. Like, Anna's being overly charitable and sympathetic to this guy's concerns, which are just motivated by homophobia and transphobia.
Okay, one of the issues that you're totally downplaying right now, not even mentioning, is that some school districts want to, let's say a student comes out and identifies as transgender, school districts want to support that student and, help him or her through that transition without ever having to notify the parents. I think there are issues there.
Okay,
and I do not begrudge parents for being concerned about that.
Anna, I agree with you.
I think that she's really overplaying what's being talked about here. So the most that I've seen that's actually happened is that there have been some school districts where a kid talks to a school counselor about their trans identity, and they're like, hey, I am really struggling. I think I might be trans, but my parents are really transphobic. And like, if they found out, they might kick me out of the home. They can't find out about this. And I'm really struggling between knowing that this is who I am, or knowing this is a side of me that I want to explore, but also knowing that like, if I do, my parents are going to hate me or kick me out of the home. In a situation like that, do you think that a school counselor should be forced to out that kid to their parents? Because that's the real discussion that's been happening over these types of situations. Like, schools cannot facilitate medical transition without parents' consent. There is no state where just without any consent of parents, a kid can just go and get hormones. Like, that's not happening. That's not happening. But if this is a matter of the child's safety over not being outed to their parents, I think that you should respect that kid's privacy and not out them in order to preserve their safety. I would hope that the school could try to facilitate a mutual understanding, if that's possible. Like, if the kid's like, I have concerns about how my parents going to react, could we like work to converse between me, the school counselor, and my parents about this? I'm all for that kind of thing happening. But if this is something where a kid is really concerned about their own safety, they do not want their parents finding out because they are afraid for their own life, I don't think a school should be forced to out them. And Anna's representation of this is very disingenuous and makes it sound like the school is like giving a kid medical transition when it's just not outing the kid for their own safety. Horrible misrepresentation of what's been happening in the most wokest of schools. Have only like not outed some kids, like literally.
I don't like gay people. I mean, I want parental control in schools. So that's the reality. You can see it all over the tapes.
That is your interpretation. None of that was actually said. It is what you have taken out of his statements there.
You're right.
Yeah.
See, I find that clip interesting because you can see Anna bend over backwards to be overly charitable towards the MAGA chud, but for some reason, she can't extend that same level of charitability towards trans people and their allies who reached out in good faith to explain to her why her rhetoric has been harmful as of late.
That's a real double standard. Yeah, very good point. She has been incredibly charitable to transphobes. Also, her handling of Jesse Singal is another example where she has spoken positively about Jesse Singal in recent weeks and been overly charitable to him, despite him literally endorsing a doctor who's a known conversion therapist. Yeah, really good double standard to highlight.
When it comes to MAGA chuds, we've got to try to interpret what they're saying in the most charitable way imaginable. But when it comes to allies of trans people and trans people, well, they're attacking me. Haven't you seen my record? It's just ridiculous. But that's not why I wanted to play the video. So when they're speculating about what this conservative means by parents in control of their children, Anna ascribes good intentions to him by suggesting that he's probably talking about school districts who support and help students through their transitions, right, without ever notifying parents. Now, she says that there's an issue with that. Now, let me be very clear. First and foremost, teachers cannot consent to gender-affirming care on behalf of parents. Parents have to give consent in order for minors to receive gender-affirming care. Second of all, protecting a child's identity is crucial because there are many LGBTQ plus kids who become homeless after getting rejected by unsupportive parents. So some school districts purposefully do not out kids to parents because of that very reason. They could literally endanger their lives. So why am I having to explain this to Anna Kasparian, who is a 17-year veteran. Leaving out that crucial context is incredibly damaging because it suggests that teachers are doing some nefarious thing by simply affirming the identities of their students. Anna is a very smart woman.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you've seen like Anna debate, like she's debated Ben Shapiro, she's debated Dennis Prager. She is very sharp. She knows exactly what she's doing. This difference in charitability and this intentional framing, which makes it sound like the teachers are transing the kids and injecting them with hormones, is so cruel and so bad faith.
She's well aware of that, but she chose to not include that in her discussion. But there's more, because she has defended anti-trans propagandist Jesse Singal, saying Jesse Singal is not a transphobe at all. They just want to suppress anything that questions the safety of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for minors. It's pretty disgusting to say the least, and I'm glad that their efforts to destroy his career hasn't worked.
Probably one of the more egregious things that Jesse Singal did was he wrote this piece in defense of Dr. Zucker after Dr. Zucker got fired because he was a conversion therapist in Canada, and Canada's new law said that, hey, conversion therapy is illegal. You got to stop doing conversion therapy. And Dr. Zucker, who was an old school conversion therapist, was like, no, I'm not going to stop doing conversion therapy. His practices involved taking away toys associated with the other gender, instructing their child not to play alongside or draw pictures of the other gender. This is literally try to be the other gender, try to make that work. That is literal conversion therapy. And Jesse Singal is staunchly defending him.
Cross-sex hormones is a dog whistle that the right uses, right? It's words that they use because it primes you to think about HRT in a more negative way. Cross-sex hormones sounds a lot more scary than HRT, which sounds banal. So they use this language.
I never thought of cross-sex hormones being used as a dog whistle before, but I think there might be some truth to that, where particularly when you see how like conservatives talk about gender affirming care, you'll see them describe it as either like child mutilation, child sex change procedures, really emphasizing like the sex aspect, really emphasizing phrases that evoke imagery of like mutilation, dismemberment, castration. That's another example. Yeah. And I think that cross-sex hormones is probably closer to more like neutral, but it does still emphasize that kind of like seemingly sexual element. And so I think that when you see like the center-right people that talk about this issue, they often kind of focus on like language more like cross-sex hormones. Meanwhile, on a more like leftist perspective, you'd see language more like gender-affirming care. I would say that HRT is probably the most neutral language. I would agree with that. I think that cross-sex hormones is objective language, but it does invoke an imagery of like sex change procedures, which I think is very scary to conservatives. And so they do know what they're doing when they invoke that kind of language.
And Anna, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, she's now using their exact words. But that's not even the real problem here with that. Putting aside Jesse Singal for a moment, who is she referring to? Who's they? Who's trying to suppress this information? Clinics who literally offer gender-affirming care to minors, they detail the potential risks. Parents know about this before confirming that they want their kids to get gender-affirming care.
Yeah, literally. Anybody who gets HRT or puberty blockers, they get like information packets detailing all of the potential side effects, when you should call a doctor, treatment alternatives, the idea that you could do nothing. It is possible to not get treatment. All of this stuff is laid out to anybody that accesses this care. So what kind of mysterious they, perhaps with some parentheses around it, are we referring to? Like, that's the vibes it's giving off.
If you don't believe me, test it out. Look it up. I'll do it for you, in fact. The St. Louis Children's Hospital, for example, lists short and long-term side effects of puberty blockers. They do the same for hormone replacement therapy and include information about how it may affect fertility. So I'll ask again, who is suppressing this information, Anna? Before parents consent to any treatment, be it gender-affirming care or diabetes or cancer treatment, they are informed about the risks and the benefits.
Yeah, this is true about literally all medicine. Like, if it's gender-affirming care or not, you get the information packet, you have to sign off on everything. Even for like pediatric cancer treatment, like they know the potential risks and side effects. And by the way, there are like pediatric cancer treatments which can result in loss of fertility, yet we still routinely provide these to kids because it's life-saving medical care. And also, if you catch things early enough, you could often bank fertility before you would lose fertility. And the same thing is true about trans youth. Increased access to fertility banking can completely solve the issue of trans people potentially being made infertile. Like, if a trans girl has sperm in the bank for when she's an adult, and she can then make the decision as an adult whether or not she wants kids, boom, easy peasy, problem solved.
Furthermore, Jesse Singal, of all people, isn't being suppressed. In fact, his constant sensationalist fear-mongering over these small amounts of detransitioners who exist was literally cited in a legal brief by Republican attorneys general to deny gender-affirming care. So his writing is influencing transphobic legal opinion, but yet people are trying to suppress him? It's just comical.
That's crazy, by the way, that, like, Twitter tier journalists are being cited in legislation that's taking away the rights of trans youth. That is literal insanity.
TYT recently released a bizarre video where they talk about Trump attacking trans athletes, and they go on to irrationally attack trans activists over the trans athlete issue, but not before trying to dig up minute examples to validate Trump's transphobic claim.
You guys have to also understand we are in a bubble. We are in a severe bubble, right? Especially when it comes to this particular issue, because there is growing rage in the country in regard to the lack of fairness when it comes to some of these specific situations in which transgender athletes are included in these competitions. You're gonna get upset about it, especially if you consider yourself or fancy yourself an activist for the transgender community. You can go ahead and get mad about it, but you need to understand that there are people who do not see it as fair, and it really depends on the specific situation.
Then it's your job to educate them. Like, that's your job, educate them.
So as I mentioned earlier, right, we don't know exactly what he is referring to, but there are some prominent cases that have led to backlash that he could be talking about, so let's give you the examples.
Stop right there. It is not your job to identify examples.
Also, she's being very charitable to Donald Trump on trans athletes, and not charitable to the people she's deeming trans advocates or trans activists. Why is she being more charitable to Trump, more charitable to that Trump supporter that they interviewed, than like trans people who are like actually talking about like the scientific literature on these issues? And not doing her job in educating people.
For Trump to validate his anti-trans argument, it is your job to explain to your audience how these anecdotes that you can find should not be used to justify discrimination. It is your job to educate.
True. Also, like, in the education, you can just completely be like, all that they have are a couple of anecdotes. Look at this. There has never been a trans woman who has won any Olympic medal, despite them being allowed to compete in the Olympics for literal decades. Like, there are so many examples and evidence and data you can bring up to show that, like, they are just misusing anecdotes when the broader trend paints that trans women are actually statistically underrepresented in sports. Despite, like there's very few trans women in sports because very few trans people even play sports and are even able to play sports at a competitive level. Relative to the percentage of the population, there are fewer trans people in sports than cis people in sports. Like, we make up like 1% of the population, but we don't make up like 1% of the people who participate in sports.
Your audience about how insignificant this issue is.
True.
There are approximately just 150 trans athletes in total in the United States.
That's tiny, by the way. Like, that would include college athletes, and there's like 150 in total. That is far less than 1% of like the college athlete population. That's tiny.
At the college level and 50 about at the K through 12 level. I mean, in 2021, Associated...
Was that 100 at the college level? 100 at the college level. That is literally nothing.
They reached out to dozens of GOP lawmakers who wrote legislation banning trans girls from high school sports, and they asked for examples of trans athletes being disruptive, and none of them could present any examples.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like, a lot of these bills end up targeting, like, literal single trans people within their state, yet they couldn't even name the trans person they were targeting because they were just a kid, and, like, they were not outperforming by any metric. Especially because a lot of these were like kids that hadn't even gone through puberty yet, and there would be no reason to exclude them because the sports are not about competition. There's not this pubertal difference in performance between the boys and the girls. And also, they're just a kid, they're just playing for fun. And there was bills targeting single individuals that they couldn't even name. Like, you can point out how bad faith the attack on trans people in sports is, yet Anna did no such thing.
But rather than approach it from that perspective and educate the audience about how the right is weaponizing this issue to gin up transphobia.
Remember the clip we showed earlier where she was just like, it's just bad faith, Republicans misrepresenting what's going on, when she was talking about inclusive language? Like, she could have done that exact same rhetoric about the trans sports issue, but she didn't.
I proceeded to scold trans activists who defend trans athletes because they claim that this is a losing issue.
Yeah.
This is not a winning issue for us. It is what it is. You do what you want with that information.
Well, the advocates and activists for the transgender community would respond with, we don't care about the politics, right? We don't care
Okay,
about...
but then they...
That's such a bad faith representation of what activists would say. What activists we wouldn't say we don't care about the politics. What we would say is convince them that we're right. Educate them. Show them why they are making a mountain out of a complete non-issue, and that the science does not justify their bigotry and their weaponization of first-grade biology. Yeah, the civil rights movement was incredibly unpopular, yet they still won politically. Oh my goodness.
No, I gotta say.
Hold on, let me just finish my thought, Jake, for
Okay,
1
go ahead,
second.
go ahead.
Okay, they'll say that, but okay, you don't care about the politics? Let's just, for once in your life, think strategically about what that means. That means that you're gonna continue pushing the Democratic Party to unequivocally support everything that the trans activists want, even if it's unpopular among the electorate. That means they're not getting reelected. That means they're gonna lose to Republicans.
What kind of world does she think does she think that like trans activists have like overrun the primaries and are making the Democratic Party so radically trans positive that like we no longer appeal to moderates? Like, the Democratic Party, by global standards, is a bunch of center-right liberals. Like, I'll take center-right liberals over fascists any day, but like this characterization of like the Democratic Party has been corrupted by trans activists to be far radical left that like normal people can't get on board with is absolutely insane, given that like the primaries still primarily lean corporate Democrat or like moderate progressive. This is just so anti-reality. If this issue is not a winning issue right now, it's your job to convince the people that are wrong about it.
Lawmakers who are passing draconian, disgusting legislation in various states right now as we speak against the transgender community. So how does that make you win exactly?
No, that is incredibly selfish of activists who are betraying their own community. Because when you say I don't care about elections, who cares about the Democrats? That isn't the point. The Republicans introduced over 600 bills against the LGBTQ community.
Right, and that's why you should convince them that you're right. Instead of like hyper focusing on this like bad optics or that you're claiming, like convince them you're right. Do your job.
That's because of elections. And over 70 of them have already passed. When you say I don't care about winning and I don't care about elections, what you're saying is I'm super selfish leftist activist and I'd like to build my cloud. But meanwhile, I'm willing to throw trans people and they
also like this characterization that activists don't care about elections. I don't see that at all. I mean, I think that there are certainly some like Twitter anarchists that don't care about elections, but they are not activists. Like on the ground activists know that elections have a lot of power. We can say what we want about Hillary Clinton and how much we all dislike Hillary Clinton, but if she would have won, we would still have Roe v. Wade. Elections freaking matter. And activists know this. It's only a very particular group of like terminally online Twitter anarchists that don't believe in electoralism. Like, you can dismiss them, you can educate them, you can educate the people that disagree on the issues, but hyper-focusing on this is just horrible. And it's not doing your job.
LGBTQ community under the bus, knowing that these bills are gonna pass.
True, yeah, that is the use of activists as like a dog whistle. Typically, like, the way that you would use this dog whistle is just framing people that disagree with you as like radical activists who are not listening to common people. This is why like there are like gender critical circles that use like trans rights activists or TRA as like a derogatory term to refer to any trans person that believes that like they should not be discriminated against. They're literally using this in a same way that like actual literal transphobes use it as a dog whistle.
We're laser focused on a losing issue. And by the way, you schmucks, you're falling exactly into the right-wing trap. The Republicans, they tried everything. They tried anti-gay stuff, it didn't work. They tried trans bathrooms, you remember that? That didn't work. Kicking the transgender community out of the military, that didn't work.
All of those were really big fights that we won by correcting and educating. And also, like, a lot of those ended up having to be challenged and overturned. Like, there were trans bathroom bills that passed in various states. There were the trans military ban passed nationally under Trump. The idea that these are all just like done fights that we won them through rigorous battles that involved us educating the population and winning these rights back in the courts, in the legislation. This is such a bad characterization of what's going on.
Drilled in until they finally found a little tiny nugget of like, hey, trans folks in like competitive sports seems a little bit much. And you don't engage them in that fight. They lose on everything else. But idiot activists, yes, I just called you an idiot. Activists go in there and go, no, I'm gonna fall right into that trap and I'm gonna fight on the only losing ground we have so we can elect more Republicans so they can pass more anti-LGBT laws.
Who goes into the voting booth and is like, you know what, I was gonna vote Democrat, but then I heard about transgenders in sports and now I'm gonna vote Republican? Like, what voter are they talking about? I have never heard a voter being swayed to the right just on the basis of like, there was a trans girl that like played basketball or whatever.
Great, well played. I'm sure your clout and your brand is doing great.
That was genuinely unhinged.
You know, I used to believe that like trans people were human, but then one of them wanted to swim, and so now I just think that, yeah, we should really like deny them their humanity and access to like medical care, right to exist in public, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
For a number of reasons. First of all, I don't know who they're specifically referring to. I'm assuming that they're shadowboxing some caricature of a trans activist that they made up in their heads to be mad about. But I mean, I want to make it very, very clear. As a cis person, you do not get to dictate the terms that trans people fight on. They're the ones whose lives are in danger, whose rights are at stake. I think that they know better than you as cis people. Furthermore, even if you disagree with which issues they prioritize, it is absolutely fucking wild to accuse them of throwing their community under the bus if they don't cede ground to the right on particular issues. I mean, imagine them telling gay people that they can have gay marriage, but if they think that businesses shouldn't be allowed to discriminate because polling shows that people want that, well, they're throwing their own community under the bus.
Yeah, this is the respectability politics argument, and it has a very heinous history. If we go back to like the early 1900s, there was a rising wing of let's say radical centrist, or by nowadays standards rather conservative white women who they wanted the right to vote for white women, but were totally willing to throw black women and their ability to vote under the bus if it meant that they could secure like white women's right to vote, which first off didn't work because the people that didn't want black women to vote largely didn't want white women to vote either. And also just like alienating your allies in the fight of suffrage. Like, black women also wanted to vote. They would be your allies in the fight for suffrage, alienating them and throwing them under the bus to try to make compromise with the people who are never going to validate your humanity and your rights. Just compromise your rights. That's all it does.
Self-sabotaging. No.
Same thing with civil rights movement, with like anti-discrimination laws, with things like desegregation of schools, of businesses. Like, there were lots of examples of this respectability politics argument just being weaponized to try to make concessions and compromises that always end up just compromising minority rights.
Discrimination is wrong, period. And
Boom.
most people, I don't think, base their political positions.
The LGBT without the T movement is another modern example of this respectability politics argument. Their rhetoric and their argumentation is identical to the logic which justified the white women suffragists that didn't want to fight for black women to be able to vote. The rhetoric and logic behind it is identical.
On polling, we base it off of morality. But on top of that, they're just wrong. David Dole explained this eloquently in a recent video about how they're so wrong on the politics of this issue.
Let's reiterate here. including 55% of Republicans saying that this is too much anti-trans legislation. This is too much. This polling finds that voters across all political parties see the Republican attempt to flood state legislatures with anti-LGBTQ plus legislation as political theater, said Aaron Thomas, a pollster at Data for Progress. It also shows that the ideas espoused by today's loudest anti-trans activists, that trans people threaten children and that our identities are a woke invention, don't resonate with the average voter.
Yeah, so they're also just like wrong on like the optical argument. In addition to them, like, by focusing on the optical argument, not doing their job, they're also wrong.
This does not resonate with the average voter. This is amazing. I'm just gonna play this.
I'm wondering if you think that DeSantis's, very public war on woke distracts from the message.
Despite how like heinous and evil and bigoted Ron DeSantis is, his unpopularity, because of how much he is isolating anyone who is relatively moderate, is outstanding. Ron DeSantis has a lower approval rating than Dylan Mulvaney, who is largely extremely unpopular amongst the right-wingers, and also, like, a lot of moderate people just think that Dylan Mulvaney's kind of annoying and so aren't very favorable of her for those reasons. But, like, DeSantis' approval ratings are lower than Dylan Mulvaney's. You can look up this in recent polling.
That you like about him.
A little bit, I do.
He did sign a law that restricts transgender care for adults as well as kids.
I have greater concerns about the 6-week abortion ban.
Tell me about that.
I think if he made
they just
it
don't care
clear
about
that
the trans
he's a
issue.
states' rights
Like, literally.
person and that he's not looking to kind of pass a national law in this regard, I would be less concerned.
This DeSantis voter is completely unfazed. She doesn't care about trans issues at all, either way. She's focused in terms of what concerns her about DeSantis. She's more focused on abortion, which makes total sense.
Raw polling data alone does not determine elections because people are so much more complex than that. They prioritize issues differently. So while Americans might support trans discrimination in sports, it is a less salient issue to them than, say, the economy or abortion. But even if it was the most salient issue and it was unpopular, the goal with our large platforms should be to change their minds, right?
That is their literal job as news reporters, as educators, as people with a public platform advocating for progressive values. That is their literal job, once again.
Kowtow to Republicans, because that's some cuck shit. I say we try to use our platforms to change people's minds rather than just throwing up the white flag. And cis people, furthermore, do not get to demand that trans people tolerate some discrimination. If you're truly an ally, you make the case for them and try to change minds, not tell them to back down. You tell Republicans to back down. You scold Republicans, not them.
Based and demolishing the respectability politics argument. Yeah, when you make concessions with bigots, essentially you just move the grand pendulum of rights closer to the regressive reactionary bigots.
When I originally talked about that clip in the video that I uploaded about TYT originally on April 13th, I explained that the tone policing was not okay because they, as cis people, are trying to set the parameters as to what is and isn't respectable forms of protest.
And reminder, with all this tone policing they do towards trans activists, the amount of charitability and credence they give to Donald Trump and his supporters on these exact same issues is so two-faced, so one-sided.
When they don't get to do that, it's not their necks on the line, it's trans people's necks who are on the line. But basically what TYT said was shouting down bigots and making them feel uncomfortable is unacceptable. But sitting quietly with the trans flag while the transphobe fearmongers about you, that is a form of protest that the Young Turks is willing to tolerate.
Well, what you're about to see is what I think is incredibly counterproductive for anyone who actually gives a damn about transgender rights in this country. Let's watch. Now, it's worth noting that there were trans rights activists in the room as she was giving her talk, and I want to show you what I think a productive protest looks like. Let's watch.
You go, they honor you, they name their Woman of the Year. And so I went to this convention, it was in January, it was in San Antonio.
Oh, is that Riley Gaines? She's the swimmer who made a career out of tying for 5th against Leah Thomas. Yeah, she's a cis woman swimmer who tied Leah Thomas for 5th in the NCAA championship and decided to make an entire career grifting about transphobia to the right wing. Like, it's crazy the amount of gigs and support she's gained from various like conservative big dark money groups. Like, I know she's been in with the Daily Wire. I think she's been on PragerU. She's been on Fox News. She's run the whole circuit of the transphobic grift. Another thing that I saw pointed out very recently that is very poignant is that whenever you see these like transphobes, athletes that make a career out of grifting about transphobia, it's always the person who places like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. It's never the person who's in like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, because those people get careers in athletics. Like they're actually good enough to be career athletes. It's always the people who miss the mark of being career athletes who make their careers out of grifting about trans people because they're not talented enough to be actual athletes.
And so I go to the convention, obviously not in support because the award was immediately meaningless.
Get any more disruptive than that, and you're going to be scolded to get back in line.
So wait, Anna's saying you can't shout down bad faith protesters, you have to just like hold up signs and be silent? Why is Anna woke scolding protesters instead of calling out the Republicans for their bad faith interpretation of these issues? The fact, like, Anna's hyperfixation on anecdotes is really concerning. It's bad faith concern trolling. She did the same thing with the bonus hole discourse. Here was an article from the Post Millennial, which was the same publication that wrote an article about me breastfeeding and called my secretions, my breast milk, secretions that are not milk. Like, crazy stuff. Milk-like substance. So the bonus hole discourse is there was an LGBT website that was like, hey, trans people and queer people, if you like feel dysphoric about certain terms for your body, here's some potential alternatives that you might use for yourself if you're interested. Just like proposing terms that people might use for themselves. And one, which I think is quite funny, was suggesting calling your vagina a bonus hole, which is literally nothing to freak out about. Like, it's funny. It's just kind of funny. But Anna was suggesting that this website was like recommending that clinicians and like medical boards use the term bonus hole instead of vagina, and that it's transphobic to use the word vagina. Like, the way that Anna was misrepresenting the story was so bad that shows that she's just doing bad faith concern trolling about pointless anecdotes distracting from the real issue.
But the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to rehash old shit, but it's necessary because Anna used that same example again to talk about an issue that she has with trans activists in a Twitter exchange with Juniper. Now, some of the tweets from Anna have since been deleted.
Oh, this was Anna's yikesy takes on the civil rights movement. Let's get into it.
We can kind of piece together what was said and come away with an understanding of her problem with trans activists. So she presumably denounces the protest against Riley Gaines here, to which Juniper responds saying, "Not sure if you've noticed, but states are currently using violence against trans people. Curious as to why you seem to care about the grifter who terrorizes trans people than trans people who are being affected by this legislation and violence." Anna replies saying, "You don't watch the show, so you have no idea what I talk about or how often I defend the trans community. I think the fringe shit and activists like you turn the country against people. You're just too stupid."
Also, dismissing Juniper as like a trans rights activist is really crazy when Juniper is primarily a shitposting account. She's still ratioing Anna like crazy.
To see it. Juniper responds saying, "You intentionally misunderstood what I said, you moron, LOL." To which Anna responds saying, "No, I didn't. You said barricading people you disagree with is non-violent. If an alt-right group did that to a trans speaker, I'm sure you'd change your tune. You're dishonest, childish, and batshit crazy." Now let's just pause it right there, because you can already see the problem with that. She's trying to frame right-wingers and trans people as if they're on equal ground when that's not the case. One of them is a marginalized community who is under attack, and the other is a political group that is trying to attack said community.
One is attack and the other is self-defense. Like that's the difference in those situations. That's why they're not analogous.
Anna made this tweet, which she ended up deleting for obvious reasons, but she says, this
one was bad. Let's go.
Civil rights movement did not use the same strategies as the trans movement. They didn't barricade speakers they disagreed with in a classroom for 3 hours. They persuaded through nonviolence and showing America their humanity. Wow. So, yeah, needless to say, I understand why she chose to delete that tweet, because it's quite the doozy. It is quite the take. Oof level is very, very high. Now, that tweet is wrong because it's ahistorical, and also trans people have chosen, like the civil rights movement, to show people their humanity. You're just choosing to not see it in this instance.
The other thing that's really relevant about the civil rights movement is that the civil rights movement, while it was being passed through the legislation, was overwhelmingly unpopular. The favorability rating of the civil rights movement typically was about 30% throughout the movement's inception. Reactionaries and bigots and right-wingers frequently portrayed the movement as extremely violent, anarchists burning down cities. There was a famous comic which caricatured Martin Luther King. Let me find that comic. MLK, there will be another peaceful protest. So this was like right-wing propaganda, where we have Martin Luther King Jr. I plan to lead another non-violent march tomorrow, while they're showing like cities being burned and destroyed. Like, this is how bigots characterized the civil rights movement. Like, Martin Luther King was, although an advocate for non-violent protest, also recognized that riots are the voice of the unheard. When you have these systemic problems that are not answered, there are going to be riots, and you can be a strong supporter of non-violent protest. And let's be real, barricading a speaker, that's not violence. That's at best civil disobedience. And at the same time, recognizing that until these until these systems of oppression, which are tearing apart people's lives, are dismantled, there are going to be riots, because those are the voice of the unheard. Like, you can take both of those positions, and that's exactly the line that Martin Luther King Jr. treaded. Yet this is how he was characterized by the bigots, and how Anna is completely ahistorically misrepresenting him.
You're choosing to sympathize with the humanity of the bigot as opposed to the trans activists who are rightfully angered at what she's saying, at what she's advocating for. See, you don't have to, believe it or not, sympathize with the bigot.
Yeah, like the freedom riders or people that would like take seats on buses. That would be seen in a very similar light to barricading speakers in a classroom back in the civil rights movement. Like, the optics of that are pretty similar.
Who's feeling discomfort for going on a propaganda tour demonizing this entire community. In the same way, though, that she tried to sympathize with the MAGA chud in her argument with Cenk, she chose to put herself in the shoes of the bigot instead of the trans activists, right? And rather than trying to understand why they would be angry, she's tone policing them. Rather than seeing that their anger might be justified because they're under attack, she's saying, don't do it this way. Do it my way.
Yeah, you can also take the position of do it my way while also recognizing these instances are the voices of the unheard. Like, that's exactly what Martin Luther King did. She's being more reactionary than Martin Luther King while trying to invoke his name and the civil rights movement. Like, that's disgusting.
The responsibility of trans activists or any trans person to coddle bigots and make them feel comfortable, especially when their rights and lives are at stake. Stonewall was a riot. Lesbians disrupted feminist meetings to demand inclusion. Anita Bryant got a fucking pie to the face. I mean, if the Young Turks were around back then, I could honestly see them tone policing gay activists who did that and saying, oh, this is bad.
Absolutely. So many of these movements were started by, like, sit-ins, takeovers, pies in the face, soup on the face. Like, this has been a common thread in activism, which gets stuff done, which pushes stuff through the legislation and enforces it with the National Guard, despite it being unpopular. That's how civil rights were won. Despite having only 30% approval, the sitting president used the National Guard to enforce desegregation of schools, and eventually people learned to deal with it. People learned to deal with desegregation. And then it became the new normal. You have to fight for these rights win them, enforce them, and then people will get over it as it just becomes the new accepted normal.
J.K. Rowling has also denounced the tactics of radical trans activists because their advocacy for themselves makes her feel uncomfortable. Now, where does that stem from? Transphobia. Because they are forcing people to see their humanity and how unjustified their exclusion from society is. So I'll ask TYT, is it civil rights that you care more about, or is it the comfort of bigots? Because you have to pick. Because either way, I promise you, however trans people choose to advocate for themselves, it's going to make bigots uncomfortable. It's going to be deemed inappropriate because the tactics aren't really the issue here, right? They know this. The fact that they have the audacity to dare demand equality and stand up for themselves in the first place when society wants them to go back into the closet is the real issue. But in conclusion, let me just say here that what TYT is doing is profoundly dangerous. And they know what they're doing. Cenk and Anna have both been in the game way longer than me, and they know exactly the impact that they are going to have.
What's really scary is how manipulative and how selective and how much of a double standard all of these problems with TYT are. They're smart people. They know what they're doing. They are creating... They're creating a diversity of tactics for the right. I'm absolutely a strong proponent of diversity of tactics, but this idea of weaponizing radical centrism, of weaponizing the optics game, the respectability politics, helps to fuel people literally down an alt-right pipeline where somebody can, who's maybe a little bit more apolitical, can first hear about, this coverage through like Anna or Cenk, or maybe even somebody who's relatively apolitical, but thinks of themselves as maybe a little bit more progressive, but hearing, oh, these trans activists are going too far, they are using bad tactics that the civil rights movement would have disagreed with. Like, when they hear this bad, manipulative, ahistorical rhetoric, it can put them down a bad pipeline. And Anna and Cenk are far too smart to be doing this by accident. It's very likely that they have some financial incentive or organizational incentive that they've been bought out. And that's just sad. I mean, we saw the same thing happen with Tulsi Gabbard. All of these, like, why I left the left situations where it's so clearly bad faith and just motivated by money. And people are too blind to see it.
They know that using specific anecdotes of marginalized people saying or doing something that they disapprove of is a dangerous game, right? Because this is what Republicans do. This is what they do to validate discrimination. They say, hey...
And that's also exactly what Anna did with the bonus hole discourse.
This one trans person or gay person did something bad. Aren't they so unreasonable? Shouldn't we deny them rights? This is how you get people to engage in transphobia, because if they buy into the premise that trans people as a whole are wrong about issue X, they're more likely to be open to discrimination, broadly speaking, right? And I don't care what TYT's intent is. I really don't. I don't care about their catalog of pro-trans videos. In fact, you can argue that that makes it worse because, again, they have a very large liberal and left-leaning audience that isn't going to listen to what the Daily Wire has to say about trans people. But if Cenk and Anna say that these trans activists are so unreasonable, their audience might actually be susceptible to that, right? And I don't even have to warn Cenk and Anna how the right is going to weaponize their grievance against trans activists as further proof that the entire community is unreasonable.
The funny thing is, this video came out the day before the Fox News article released. Like, he called it out prophetically, literally the day before. There was a Fox News article talking about how Anna Kasparian breaks with the left and says that puberty blockers cause irreparable harm. Like, their impacts are spreading widespread in a really bad way. He's spot on in his analysis.
Because they've already done that. My polite disagreement with Anna over the birthing person shit was literally quoted in Fox News as evidence that trans activists are unreasonable.
Oh, this was the old one about Anna. Right. The newest Fox News article about Anna came out the day after this. This was the old Fox News article. Anna's had 2 Fox News articles now. Oh my goodness.
And no disagreement at all is allowed when all I simply tried to do was engage in good faith, have a conversation. Furthermore, they have a massive, massive, massive audience, right? Saying something incorrect or making a hyperbolic statement about an entire group of people, I mean, that has consequences. And let me just say this. As a gay man, this is not the first time where I've had to confront supposed allies about them being bad allies, right? I think that if you're a queer person, you've absolutely met an ally once or twice whose support is fickle and conditional. But here's the thing. They're never going to be there for you when you need them the most. So those types of allies, just disregard them. Perhaps they'll support you passively and offer kind words once in a while, but that's the extent of their support. You know the kind of allies I'm talking about, right? The ones who will say, oh, I have no problem with gay people. I support the sinner, not the sin.
It's always like the sinister but. I support gay people, but... And you know that some real sinister stuff's about to come right after the but.
Say that they love LGBTQ plus people and have an LGBTQ plus friend or family member, but yet they vote Republican every single election cycle. Those types of allies. Those are the allies that are just worthless, in my opinion, right? They're not going to be my number one enemy, but certainly they're not going to be somebody who I spend much time with. There's a difference between those kinds of allies and the allies who assured me when I came out, or more specifically when I was outed to everyone, that they're going to protect me and literally put their bodies on the line to stop physical harm from coming my way, because I was afraid that that would happen when a homophobic family member was sitting ominously in their car for hours across the street from my house. I was wondering, oh my God, am I going to get attacked by a baseball bat? The people who assured me that no harm will come my way, that's the kind of allies we deserve.
Allyship is not about making compromise with bigots. Never.
And I've talked about my experience in a coming out video. I'll link to that down below if you want to learn more. The point is that you deserve that kind of an ally. You deserve the allies who are willing to put aside their own comfort to confront bigots and make them feel uncomfortable so you don't have to. You deserve the type of ally who's going to put their necks on the line to save you from harm or discrimination.
Absolutely. And this is a team effort. 100% Pandora then. Like, the fight for progressive rights is a universal fight for human rights. We all win when we protect each other, when we advocate on behalf of each other, when we stand up for each other. We are stronger in numbers. And the people that make the respectability politics argument, that make compromise with bigots, that try to throw people under the bus, are only weakening their movements, weakening their numbers, essentially setting the political pendulum closer to the game that the right wants to play. It's a loss on all of these angles.
What I'm trying to say ultimately is you deserve better than TYT. If they're going to apply terms and conditions to their support for trans people or trans activists, it doesn't make the trans people unreasonable to tell them to go fuck themselves. They're the ones being unreasonable. And look, you can be disappointed. I personally am disappointed. I've watched TYT since 2008, when George W. Bush was still president. And I've been a network partner since 2017, up until May of this year. There's been periods where I disagree with them and didn't like some things that they said about particular issues. But I still never would have expected this level of vitriol towards trans activists.
Yeah, it's very much giving off the energy of like the start of a conservative grift, and not giving off the energy of like an honest mistake that somebody's willing to listen and change their mind on.
Of their intents or how they got here, that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that they're here now. In the same way I've had to cut out cancerous family members, I'm cutting out TYT from my media diet. Because if the so-called home of progressives tries to make you feel like shit for standing up for yourself in the face of discrimination and possibly elimination, I promise you, you don't need them in your life. You don't. You deserve better. Trans people deserve better. You can find better allies than that. So I'll tell TYT the same thing that I've told family members who tried to make me feel bad for shoving my gayness down their throats or advocating for myself too much or too loudly. Go fuck yourself.
That was a very solid video, and I thought that was really good coverage. Overall, really good analysis. I think their one argument about cross-sex hormones being used as a dog whistle might have been, I don't know if that was the strongest point, like outright, but I think there is a finer point about like the language that people use to refer to various medical procedures that you can make. I don't have an issue with cross-sex hormones as a term, but I can see how that might be more of a loaded term for some than others. Woo-wee.